Hi, and welcome to Biopilates Deep Dive. Today we're exploring in detail the kneeling side kick, a movement where anatomical precision and postural mastery meet. Listen to my body speak and let me unfold in a calm voice everything that happens when I execute a lateral kick on one knee. I adopt the starting position with precision. The torso faces sideways and inclines slightly without twisting. The pelvis and spine remain neutral. The weight settles onto one hand, placed directly under the shoulder. The arm extended firmly but not locked, while the supporting knee is positioned just under the hip. The free leg extends at hip height, perfectly parallel to the floor, the ankle in dorsiflexion. My upper hand rests behind my head, the elbow pointing toward the ceiling to open the rib cage and remind my shoulder blades to stay low and toned. Once prepared, I inhale for 2 counts to bring the leg forward through hip flexion without losing trunk stability, then lengthen further, and finally exhale to return into hip extension to the rear, slide into a gentle plantar flexion, and, if the movement calls for it, subtly extend the toes. I perform 8 to 10 repetitions on each side without rushing, seeking quality over quantity. In this deliberately controlled framework, the motor end plate is my first stage. It is the neuromuscular junction where the motor neuron, via its axonal ending, delivers the order to the muscle fiber. On its presynaptic membrane, the nerve impulse triggers the release of acetylcholine into the synaptic cleft. On the postsynaptic membrane, the receptors open, depolarization begins, and the contractile fiber comes to life. If this mechanism is refined, it is because the precision of the gesture is equally so. Each phase of the movement demands its own recruitment, a calibration of the action potential frequency, and a distribution of work between slow postural fibers and fast explosive fibers. The motor end plate is therefore not a simple switch. It modulates, doses, synchronizes. It is what allows me to lift the leg without disturbing the pelvis, to lengthen the point without collapsing the ankle, to propel an extension without losing the line of my spine. I then call upon the key muscles at the front of the leg and the top of the foot because they guide the ankle and toes like conductors. The extensor digitorum longus originates on the lateral condyle of the tibia, on the anterior and proximal part of the fibula, as well as on the interosseous membrane. Its tendons, dividing toward the second, third, fourth, and fifth toes, reach the dorsal expansions to insert into the middle and distal phalanges. It extends the toes, participates in dorsiflexion of the ankle, and contributes slightly to foot eversion. The extensor digitorum brevis, in turn, originates from the superolateral surface of the calcaneus and runs toward the tendons of the extensor digitorum longus of the lateral rays, helping to reinforce metatarsophalangeal and proximal interphalangeal extension of the second, third, and fourth toes. The extensor hallucis longus originates on the anterior surface of the fibula in its middle third, and on the interosseous membrane. It inserts at the base of the distal phalanx of the big toe. It extends the hallux, participates in ankle dorsiflexion, and through the positioning of its tendon, subtly influences the medial stability of the plantar arch. All three are commanded by the deep fibular nerve, a terminal branch of the common fibular nerve, a constant reminder that the neuromuscular system is interconnected and that weakness in command can immediately be seen in the tip of the foot. When I lift the leg forward on the inhale, I feel the extensor digitorum longus and the extensor hallucis longus accompany ankle dorsiflexion to keep the blade of the foot well aligned. They hold the alignment of the toes, prevent them from curling, and distribute tension across the instep. The extensor digitorum brevis stabilizes the metatarsal column at the top of the trajectory, an often overlooked but crucial approach to prevent the ankle from compensating with a stray movement. When I exhale and the leg moves into hip extension, I let the ankle glide into a controlled plantar flexion. I never release the tone of the extensors because even in plantar flexion, they guide, break, stabilize. They prevent the point from collapsing, the foot axis from twisting, and the supporting knee from receiving undesirable torque. All this distal refinement would be worthless without proximal architecture. The transverse abdominis cinches the lumbopelvic belt like an active breathing corset. It compresses without blocking, fixes without stiffening. The internal and external obliques oppose unwanted trunk rotations and, along with the spinal erectors, keep the spine neutral. The deep multi-fidi shear microsegmental rotations and return the pelvis to neutrality in all three planes. On the supporting hip, the abductors, notably the gluteus medius and minimus, hold the platform and prevent pelvic drop. The lateral rotators, in isometric contraction, align the femur under the hip and protect the knee. On the supporting shoulder, the depressors and stabilizers of the scapula, such as the serratus anterior, lower trapezius, and rhomboids, keep the glenoid stable under load, while the rotator cuff centers the humeral head. If the shoulder collapses, the whole chain falls, and the elegance of the gesture vanishes. I turn my attention to breathing as it modulates intra-abdominal pressure, supports the diaphragm, and guides the neuromotor tempo. On a 2-count inhale, I fill the ribs laterally, feel the pelvic floor respond, engage the transverse abdominis without closing the throat. The leg advances, the hip flexes, but the pelvis stays calm. On the 2nd count, I lengthen further without losing the axis. Then, on the exhale, I let the rib cage descend, initiate hip extension, keep the neck long, and let the ankle glide into plantar flexion like brushwork. This breath movement alternation is no detail. It links motor end plate command to pressure changes, synchronizes deep fiber recruitment with distal muscle action, and reduces upper trapezius tension, sworn enemies of a stable shoulder. I focus on simple cues. I stabilize the supporting shoulder to prevent sagging and internal rotation. I keep the pelvis as stable as possible without exaggerated anterior or posterior tilt. I avoid spinal flexion or extension as my neutral is my rudder. I distribute the weight of the hand across the thumb-index pinch without crushing the heel of the hand. I keep the free leg at a constant height, thanks to the abductors, neither higher nor lower. I break the momentum because speed is nothing without control. If I sense unnecessary tension in the neck, I lower the shoulders, release the jaw, open the elbow toward the ceiling, and return to my breath. Anatomy continues to guide me. When the leg comes forward, the hip flexors concentrate the effort, but I do not forget the lumbar and pelvic coactivation that prevents excessive lordosis. When the leg moves backward, the hip extensors take over, gluteus maximus for power, hamstrings for continuity, posterior fibers of the gluteus medius for lateral stability. The toe and hallux extensors, though distal, shape the ankle mechanics, determine the foot plane, and thus protect the supporting knee against rotation or valgus. The chain is one from the tip of the toes to the head. I do not forget endurance. The hip abductors must stay active throughout the series. The stabilizers of the supporting shoulder must never yield. Quality is measured in consistency, identical alignment on the 1st and 10th repetition. If fatigue sets in, I reduce the range before sacrificing technique. Better a small, impeccable arc than a large, sloppy gesture. I set golden rules for myself. I place before I move. I breathe before I push. I slow down before I accelerate. I feel the sole of the free foot like a rudder, In dorsiflexion, my extensors guide. In plantar flexion, they break. I keep my gaze horizontal to stabilize the inner ear. I err on the side of rigor rather than license. Common mistakes are clear. A shoulder that rises and pinches the neck signals a lack of scapular depression. A swaying pelvis betrays insufficient abductor engagement. A rounding or arching spine shows a lack of control from the transverses and erectors. An ankle that whips into inversion indicates poor guidance from the extensors. I correct by returning to basics: breath, neutral, lines, tempo. Progress is built patiently. I start on a firm mat, then introduce a slightly unstable surface to awaken the stabilizers further. I play with tempos: 2-count inhale, 3-count exhale, then the reverse to increase transition control. I add a short isometric pause at the end of range, leg forward, then leg back, to force the motor end plate to stabilize without jerking. I keep reps moderate and add sets if I want to work endurance, ensuring I preserve form. I also know this movement has repercussions beyond the gesture itself. It teaches axis discipline, creative support, and discrete extremities. It strengthens the link between plantar perception and proximal stability. It refines the relationship between breathing and force production. It prepares both the athlete and the rehab patient to master open chain hip control, a loaded scapular girdle, and a dual register ankle, dorsiflexion, and plantar flexion. It paves the way for larger, faster kicks, always governed by the same framework: clear intention, fine command, faithful transmission. When I close the sequence, I return to my supporting hand, feel the scapula slide toward the back pocket, let the diaphragm rise, and lighten my neck. I thank my toe extensors and my extensor hallucis longus for keeping the foot line. I thank my transverses for keeping the course. I thank my abductors for suspending the leg like a taut string. I thank the motor end plate for silently orchestrating the conversation between nerve and fiber. And I know that if I start again tomorrow, nothing will be left to chance. Same cues, same demands, same patience. For the true strength of the kneeling sidekick is not the violence of a strike, but the peace of a body that knows exactly how to place itself, propel itself, and find itself again on each repetition in the rightness of the gesture. Thank you for diving with me into the anatomy and biomechanics of this movement. May every repetition now be a conscious, fluid, and powerful gesture. See you soon in the next episode of Biopilates Deep Dive.